Howdy, SSM406. For your final lecture in unit number 2, I want to discuss the importance of rhetoric and morality in decision-making for environmental policy. So up to now, we've been talking about the 4 sources of environmental problems. Those include externalities, public goods, common pool resources, and environmental justice. Now, most of environmental problems are caused by at least one, if not more than one, of these issues. But when we talk about environmental problems, we don't always make decisions based on the efficiency of those arguments. Why not? Well, let's think about this in a non-environmental issue. Let's think about the topic of slavery. So over 150 years ago, Black people were treated as slaves. They were not considered human beings. People were owned. And that was morally wrong. Perhaps there was an argument, and indeed there was an argument for the Civil War, that plantations, cotton plantations, the economic viability of farmers in the South depended on slavery. They needed slaves to have enough money to make their farms profitable for them. But it was morally wrong. You can't own people. But that's not one of the 4 arguments we're talking about, right? There are important arguments we need to pay attention to in regards to the morals of issues. And when we're talking about things in the environmental and political decision-making sphere, you don't hear people talking about we need to have the military because it is a public good. You don't hear those words, right? You hear we need to fund the military to protect us against ISIS, against the Islamic State, against Iraq, against Syria. But then you also have people on the other side of the argument saying we shouldn't be interfering in wars that are happening in other countries. We shouldn't be in Afghanistan. We shouldn't be in Syria. We shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be using our money in that fight. So this is not an economic argument. This is more about the morals, values, and rhetoric in decision-making. When we think about the environment, we don't hear people saying, we must save the whales because it's a common pool resource. No, we must save whales because they're sentient beings. They share the planet with us. We shouldn't be killing animals of high intelligence, right? Those are the arguments that we're hearing, and those are more moral and more about rhetoric in decision-making rather than making an economic argument about common pool resources. So I'm teaching you the technical ways to look at these arguments. But I want to make sure that you understand that a lot of arguments and a lot of decisions in policy are made on emotion. So one of the things that I don't want you to forget while you're writing your essay is, yes, we have these 4 very important technical analytical frameworks for looking at environmental problems. But I also want you to consider the moral argument, and I'll be looking for that in your essay. If you're looking at the Endangered Species Act and you go to the Convention on Biodiversity, Convention on Biological Diversity website, I think is the name of it. Really great resource, but they aren't making the argument about it being a common good. They're making the argument that it is a moral decision on being, including wildlife, saving wildlife, making decisions to protect endangered species so humans are not causing the extinction of certain species. For them, it is a moral argument. And that's really important for you to think about while you're writing your papers and putting everything into this analytic framework. Because the analytic framework is going to be very good for you to try and tease apart what are emotions. But one's a more technical, analytical way of looking at a problem and looking at solutions with policy. And the other one is much more about the values that people hold. And that's a much more difficult issue to deal with. And in the future, units, we're going to be talking about political decision making. But the last thought I wanted you to have for Unit 2 is I want you to understand how to think about how to incorporate the moral issue into your argument. If we look back at the idea of slavery, we had to fight a war to get rid of slavery. Of course, there were other tertiary issues as part of the Civil War, but overall, thousands of people died to protect the moral and value judgment that people should not be slaves. So it's really good for you to have these technical groundings on the analytical frameworks for making this environmental decision making. But I want you to really understand that these tools will help moral arguments. It'll help you put some holes in some of those arguments. But ultimately, we are not making decisions based on technical analysis. We are making decisions based on values, morals, and rhetoric. That is the most important lesson that I want you to take home from Unit 2. I want you to include it as well as the other 4 externalities: common pool resources, public goods, and environmental justice, and understand how morals, values, and rhetoric are a piece of that argument. In the next unit, number 3, we're going to be talking about how politics are a part of environmental decision making as well. Until then, have fun on memo number 2. I really look forward to seeing how you continue to develop your memo and your arguments. Thanks.